Amazon pulls Blue phones again over security concerns. Nextbit ends support for the Robin. Facebook is planning a home video phone type of device, and Apple faces another class action lawsuit, this one over FaceTime. Plus, David Reddick from Android Police drops by to help us unpack the camera comments from former Google executive Vic Gundotra. Are Android cameras really years behind the iPhone? Well, we'll take a closer look at that statement. There's a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 264 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Recorded August 3rd at 3 p.m. Eastern, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and every sci-fi film had some kind of home video phone. We're finally realizing that geeky dream. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at Pocketnow.com, blasting the signal from a beautiful day in sunny Southern California, joined as always by plucky podcast producer, Mr. Jules Wong, out on location. What's going on, buddy boy?
To be excited. I mean, the way into the mall, I was supposed to be at a hotel, but the way into this Durham Mall, I was on the bus. And the mall is actually the terminus of the bus route. And the PA is in this robotic voice says, "We're finished. Thank you." So this is me right now. I'm finished. Thank you.
It's like I was wearing my NCOM shirt. You need that Tron voice, end of line, like to let you know when to get out.
Yes, indeed. Done. Take me away from this miserable world.
I love it. In just a bit, we're going to be bringing David on. I really want to dig in. David's one of my favorite. I want to call him a tech provocateur. Some of his editorials and his criticisms are just so beautifully eviscerating for a lot of the tech audiences out there that I'm really going to enjoy discussing these camera comments from Mr. Gundotra. But before we get to that point, Jules, would you be so kind as to to inform people as to how they can get in touch with us for the show?
Yeah, sure, indeed. So you can do so by getting onto your little Twitter app or whatever you use for Twitter. Could be another API thing. And do the hashtag PNWeekly, and type in your question, send it to there. YouTube could be another way that we could do it, but the chat has been very, very, very active, and we can't really keep track of everything going on. So Twitter is the best way to do things live. If you can't make it live, if you aren't here right now, then podcast@pocketnow.com is the best way to ask your questions, and we can pile them up and then do a little mailbag at the end of the show. So podcast@pocketnow.com, hashtag PNWeekly, all the better for you to tell us what you're thinking right now.
Beautiful. And we're already getting some great questions in on that PN Weekly hashtag from Brandon, from Andrew Wallace. Fat Produce is a regular a GIF contributor to the Pocketnow Weekly. So we've got some great questions in there. We will be jumping in as we get closer to the end of the show, just so that we can chat all that fun stuff out. But I think we need to chew through the news. We started a little bit later, and we definitely want to make sure that David's a part of this conversation. So let's get through the top news topics of the week. I'm going to take over this one because Jules has like an army of small children that are following him around. There's one of them right there.
Yeah, this is the show and tell part, and now I'm going to be silent while you tell me what's up with this V30 going on here.
Yeah, so kicking things off, we've got the LG V30. We're going to be producing, actually it's going to go live later this afternoon, is sort of a rumor roundup on the LG V30. But one of the big rumors coming out is, well, we know we're saying goodbye to the LG V20's secondary ticker display. There was a little screen at the top of your main screen. You could dock it for, you could dock shortcuts there, just have a really fancy signature so everyone knew it was your phone. And that's obviously going to be going away on a phone that's already stretched and tall. To make up for that, it seems like LG is going to be delivering a custom piece of software to have a floating dock. And this is definitely something that LG has experimented with in the past, things like Q-Slide apps. So it makes a lot of sense. In terms of rumors, we're going to put a pretty high probability that LG is going to have a solution there. I'll be curious to see if it can really properly dock at the bottom of the screen, because having really tall, long, skinny phones, it's sometimes a reach to get up to that notification shade. Now, moving on to other fresh developments in hardware news. Facebook is rumored to be developing a video chat device. We've got a post on this that actually performed really well from Adrian on Pocketnow.com, and the sort of dummy image that they've developed for it. It looks a lot like maybe something that Amazon has already produced with video capabilities, just sort of a wedge with a screen and a speaker on it. But in sort of doubling down on the current entrenched user base with Facebook Messenger and facing more competition from other outlets, especially Amazon being a primary competitor there, it makes a lot of sense that Facebook would be trying to develop something in that arena and not going the phone route, because we all know how Facebook phones turned out back in the day. Now, shifting gears over to Microsoft, this was another hot story because it's just such a bizarre filing to read from Microsoft that in an absence of, proper first party tablets, not like the Surface, but some of their other experimental, like a Surface Mini, which never really saw the light of day. We've got Microsoft potentially working on a battery touch cover for the iPad. Now, Microsoft has an amazing track record for sort of office accessories, keyboards and mice. Like, I'm using a Microsoft mouse, and actually I'm using a Logitech keyboard, but I used to have one of those really split, awesome, wide ergonomic keyboards. So this actually kind of makes sense with that old school Microsoft hardware philosophy. It's just, I think there is some disappointment from those of us who have had our hearts broken by Microsoft so many times that they're willing to make accessories for the iPad, but we're not seeing any development on Windows for phones or anything like that.
Well, because we actually want to break in with breaking
No,
news.
definitely.
Oh my goodness! So earlier on today, we found out in their Form 10K, because they always file a new mission statement or whatnot with all the assets and whatever at the SEC. And looking at the mission and looking at their overview of what their business is, what products they offer, they removed all mentions of mobility and phones.
Yeah.
So it's like, what products do we offer? Well, last year they had the word phones in that lineup, and now it's just, there's no phones. It's just other intelligent. The phrase "other intelligent devices" has been used in both 2016 and 2017, but it just seems like they're relegating phones to the other, to the nether, to the void. So,
yeah, that definitely
really
has been sort of Nadella's initiative, is turning Microsoft more into a services company than a hardware company. And you just can't ignore the success of Xbox and Surface. But any department that was sort of struggling or not delivering or not blowing up their part of the market seems to have gotten the axe. And that, again, I'm sure we could still see some movement on a potential Windows mobile device in the future, but it's definitely not a primary focus for this company right now. What is a primary focus for Microsoft, though, and this is going to be some good news for Surface fans out there, is they're going to be introducing a zero-interest leasing program for Surface devices with 18-month upgrades. And this is something that I think makes a lot of sense in the current market. We've sort of programmed consumers for their phones to be working in sort of 1 to 3 year timeframes on how they update devices, and now Surfaces are starting to become that sort of de facto mobility idea. And this just sort of gets consumers on board in a way where you don't feel the pain of dropping too large on your computer every time you need to upgrade. It's I think
also, you don't, like, you can still pay out the 24 months and then you own the device too. And there's also multiple options for businesses with flexible terms and upscale, downscale. It's much more convenient, economical, and ensures that Microsoft has a constant monthly flow of revenue.
Well, and also it's treating hardware like software. Like, we expect significant software updates every year, and now I think that there's an idea of ecosystem where everything's getting updated and upgraded.
Is this Haas?
Yes, actually, yeah. Absolutely. Moving over to Motorola, we've got some news. This is going to be disappointing to some folks out there, that there will be no shatter shield replacements for the Moto Z2 Force. This has been a popular add-on for other companies, like a screen replacement for accidental damage. Actually, I'm just going to read from the full statement here. Our apologies, but we were mistaken about the option to get a replacement liner. So there's a plastic liner on the Moto Z2, which I don't have right in front of me
Yeah,
right here.
and for context, while he's pulling that up, so the Droid 2 Turbo 2 was the first one to have it. The Moto Z Force was the next one, and then this is the third generation. And we've been following on because people have been posting about just all these scratches. It scratches easily, and people are worried about, okay, what can we do in order to fix the situation? And Motorola initially told us that, okay, so we're going to have a consumer version that's going to be improved, and we're also going to have the replacement liners, which is the top, just the top layer, and you're going to be fine with that. It costs $29.99. And then they followed up with another email and said, oh, sorry, we screwed up. We're not going to do that because no one was buying those replacement liners. So, I mean, it just goes to, and they're actively pushing third-party screen protectors too, which is kind of it's odd. It's really
well,
odd.
and that's an incomplete solution, especially when there are, I think, some very fair concerns over a phone that will not. I mean, it survives the big singular event better. Dropping your phone from a higher height, having it land on concrete, something like that. Your screen's not going to shatter. That does a better job. But when it doesn't survive the daily sort of rough and tumble abuse, where you putting your phone in a pocket with keys is no longer a concern with Gorilla Glass, but it's a big concern if your phone screen is made out of plastic. This is a disappointing step back when this was a service that they offered for previous Moto Shatter Shield products. So I think, again, fairly, this is something that I hope Motorola will correct course on if there is enough traction. Part of this is also just how many of these phones are going to get sold. And people are making some pretty tough decisions on what features they want and what compromises they can live with. Now, another phone that's going to be getting a lot of press soon, and we've only been getting sort of unofficial renders and some really cute graphics depicting what the general screen layout's going to look like. There's a treasure trove of Apple leaked iPhone 8 info, and this includes things like the screen resolution, which is, again, this isn't still properly confirmed. Nothing's properly confirmed until Apple says it.
I mean,
But
it's so basically it's sending out HomePod code to third-party developers for them to work with. A lot of it has contingent code for the devices that
right.
may interact with it.
So,
and
so these are definitely a lot more on point than just like regular rumors that got filtered out through someone in manufacturing. But we will be seeing a higher resolution panel, 2436 by 1125. So not quite quad HD, but again, Apple has always had funky non-standard screen resolutions, so that's not too surprising there. We're going to be getting tap to wake, which is a feature that a lot of Android phones have implemented to great effect, but no sign of Touch ID, which might be a concern for some folks if Apple really is going to have to walk away from Touch ID as the security apparatus for a lot of the services on the iPhone, instead going to Face Unlock or something.
And just to follow on from that, there's been code references to something called Pearl, could be called Pearl ID, and that may combine the face and iris recognition of sensors that may go into it. Could also be authentication for Apple Pay, because we also found that corresponding to contactless payments. So something else to watch out for.
Definitely. And again, that's one of those things that makes me nervous about Apple implementing so many changes in one generation of iPhone. But in other sort of controversial Apple news, Apple's facing another class action lawsuit, this time pointing to crippling of FaceTime, as owners of older iPhones made the transition in software from iOS 6. There was a mandatory iOS 7 update, and that did break some of the functionality of FaceTime. Apple has been trying to get a judge to dismiss this class action suit, and it seems like we've crossed that threshold where this suit is going to proceed. It's not going to be thrown out. So now it's just going to be another one of these sort of ongoing conversations. Just what is a company's responsibility to older products? What is a company's responsibility to their consumers? How should we be handling things like updates? We talk about the sort of fracturing and fragmentation in the Android land, but there is also a sense of feature fragmentation for iOS. You get sort of those core updates, but you might not always get the best individual feature updates from software generation to generation. And
And then there's
then,
ultimately the gates from iOS that you just can't get past 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever.
oh,
So, I
absolutely.
mean, obsolescence is inevitable, but it depends on how it's handled. That's always the key.
Well, and I think it also, I mean, this actually does, in a really roundabout way, speak to Apple's success as a software updating platform, that their consumers expect a certain level of service and support well beyond what we've come to expect in Android land. And speaking of software, oh yeah, definitely. And speaking of software, this is going to be a bummer for a lot of the enthusiasts in our audience, but official software updates for the Nextbit Robin are done. The actual Nextbit tweet to clear up some confusion, although we're ending customer support, we will continue software updates until February of 2018 as planned. But this is talking more about development, so we're probably looking at just whatever security patches or bug fixes might be easy to implement for the platform. We're not talking about any major or new development moving forward for this. And I'll be really curious to see what impact this has on this team, which I think is still operating as a cohesive team under Razer, and what that might mean for future products there. But it's definitely going to be disappointing news if you were one of those folks who went out there and were ready to join the experiment of trying something different, of using a Robin as your phone. There were some really great ideas there. The implementation still needed, I think, a little work, and they got stuck with a bad chipset generation, but there was a lot of charm in what the Robin could do. So it's always sad when we see something just come to a complete dead end. And
Indeed, it is. And you know what's come to a dead end for Amazon or for Blue or for
that,
either of them?
that was a better segue than what I was going to come up with, Jules. It's like you do the news more often than I do. The last bit of the last headline that this got a lot of noise. So what it was last year that we saw Amazon pull Blue phones over security, potential security issues. Again, we see Amazon pulling some of their most popular selling unlocked phones from Blue. And again, just some of these issues that with the software that comes pre-installed on the device, potential exploits, potential holes, Amazon is trying to make sure that there is no negative press surrounding this type of direct-to-consumer sale. They've really been stepping up their game on marketing and selling unlocked phones. So anything to do with privacy, anything to do with security, they're going to be reacting to very aggressively. And we just had this post updated. So Blue commented, releasing a statement, I believe yesterday afternoon, retreading its defense of the firmware from November. The company is criticizing media attention on Chinese servers and insists that only basic information is being collected. Excuse me. The activity has been more vigorously. Johnson claims that the activity has been more vigorously concealed. So this is from CryptoWire. Researcher Ryan Johnson is the one who was tracking what information Blue was keeping tabs on, and then also sharing with these Chinese servers. There is another update. Blue has commented on the Amazon sales stoppage. Since November 2016, when the initial privacy concern was reported, Blue quickly remedied. Amazon has been aware of the ADUPs, and other applications on our Blue devices, which were deemed at the time by Blue, Amazon, and CryptoWire to pose no further security or privacy risk. Now, almost a year later, the devices are still behaving in the same way, with standard and basic data collection that pose no security or privacy risk. There has been absolutely no new behavior or change in any of our devices to trigger any concern. We expect Amazon to understand this and quickly reinstate our devices for sale. And so I want to jump right in on this one, Jules. The CryptoWire comments are a little above my pay grade. Like I am not as well versed on some of these security concerns and security threats. Do we think Amazon might be overreacting? This is to protect their own image as opposed and throwing a manufacturer under the bus to make sure they look like they're being the responsible reseller?
I mean, they threw Shanghai ADUPs initially back in November as part. You know, they said there was some sort of a violation or a breach of agreement in terms of what features they want to include in that the firmware, like reading data and all that, sending it back to Chinese servers. And I didn't really, it didn't seem like both of them are on the defenses right now, and they're both supporting each other in this aim. And they're saying that nothing has changed, or rather, approved changes have already gone through, and CryptoWire has seen them. Google has seen them or something, and I mean, Tripwire has said since that Blue does not speak on behalf of them. So it's just,
Right.
it's all a word of he said, she said at this point. Uh, when you
Well,
have the data points in the first place, you have to address them. I feel
yeah,
like they
definitely.
haven't
So
addressed them.
I think that's fair. So if someone is bringing up concerns, it absolutely is Amazon's not only prerogative, but I think it's their responsibility to address those concerns. I also wonder if a part of this isn't just exploit fatigue. The number of different threats that we're all supposedly encountering on a daily basis, from Chinese hackers delivering Windows malware to Broadpawn to updates for phones to IoT devices that can be zombified and used in DDoS attacks.
I mean, it's a chain of trust that we have. China has a more lax, use all your data. Part of the communist, frame of mind where everything's easier. You have, I mean, how else are you going to pay for all this stuff mobily? Hail a
Right.
taxi, get food immediately, and all that. It takes a lot of data moving back and forth at the same time, and they're much more. It's the WeChat economy for them, whereas
Yeah.
we value more privacy, and it's that disconnect that we haven't always been comfortable with. It's this relationship of hardware where it's cheap and software that is also cheap to maintain and vend. That is sort of tying us together still, and we're just finding ourselves at the crossroads of that.
Well, and I think there's also become a growing understanding that when you use a free service, you're the product.
I mean, we've
But
Google now, and entering into that, your flight
totally.
data or a calendar event and targeted advertising, which really was properly targeted.
Yeah,
Like
completely.
it just clings onto your last web page search and basically shows you it for the next 90 million days. So, I mean, inexact sciences suck, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And what doesn't suck, though, is catching all of the latest news headlines on Pocketnow.com. Make sure you check out the site for all of the top mobility and tech stories of the day, in addition to Android Police. As I see, we are now joined by Mr. David Ruddock. I think he's muted and his webcam
I'm
is
here.
on. He is here, and apologies, we started a little late, so I know we wanted to bring you in at the half hour, and we're a couple minutes behind there. But thank you so much for joining us. This is a conversation I was really excited to be having with you this week.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Glad to do it.
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, let's just kind of sum up, because this is one of these sort of iOS Android grudge match kinds of conversations where I feel there's a lot of emotion behind statements when people have picked a team and they're rooting for their team. And so I am inclined to disagree with Mr. Gundotra, but I also really want to try and give him a fair shake on what he means versus the exact language of what he says. So I'm going to be doing some interpreting, I feel, which may or may not be fair. But it was when did he post this? It was July 29th in a Facebook thread about photography. He's posting some adorable pictures of his children. People start asking about cameras, and he's making these off the cuff remarks about how the DSLR is dead, the iPhone and image processing, this is the way of the future. And if you want to be in step with the future, Apple's ecosystem is going to be better than Android's. And if you don't mind being a couple years behind, that's why you want to buy an Android camera over an iPhone camera. And just to start, I was really hoping that you could share, like, what was your reaction when you saw a former Google executive make this kind of statement publicly on Facebook?
Well, Vic's always been a pretty incendiary guy that way. I don't think anybody would ever accuse Vic Gundotra of not adequately voicing his opinions, even when he was at Google. I mean, he was the face of Google Plus. He was the face of Google's big social shift, made it sound like that was the direction the company was going in, period, and that was, full steam ahead. So he's always been very outspoken, very direct, and I don't think it's at all out of character for him to say something like this. And he was always a little off the cuff too. And I think in this particular instance, what I took away was kind of just the generalizations that were being made, especially the whole 2 to 3 years behind thing. That didn't make any sense to me, really, on any
Yeah.
level. I felt like he didn't really explain that well. If he had a cogent argument for that point in particular, I wasn't seeing it. I did understand what he meant about the DSLR. I understand what he means about how, Apple's been able to do the wide lens and then the long lens and integrate that in a way that works really well and produces good results. And but he seemed to be going off on a lot of tangents. And granted, it wasn't like wasn't some official appearance or statement or anything. He's just talking about what he thinks about smartphone cameras. And when he started talking about how Google's gotten away from computational photography, I thought, well, has Vic been really paying attention to what's been going on with Google in
Right.
phones in the last year or so? It doesn't seem like it, if that's the case. So I felt like Vic may be a little bit out of touch, maybe with what's going on with Android at this point, comparatively, at least on a deeper level. And probably, like a lot of people, is just enjoying the fact that the iPhone offers that more integrated experience. And I think that a lot of people eat up the brand message and the marketing.
Yeah.
Even people who are, high level technology executives can really start to, I think, get sucked into that. Not that that's all marketing, but I think that really enters into some of the kind of the feelings people associate with Apple products about integration, completeness, the value of the integrated ecosystem.
Well, and especially from a company like Apple, where I think their only competitor in terms of mindshare would be Samsung. The only company that's really sort of matching them, reaching parity with having a conversation with the consumer that appeals to the emotional side of purchasing one of these devices. I mean, all of the various, billboards around Los Angeles, shot on an iPhone, and you're like, you made a photo that you put on a billboard shot from a phone. And I think that's an easy way to resonate with general consumers, and then also with people who are probably more technologically inclined too. That message is going to sink in really effectively.
I agree with that for sure. The billboards are no doubt Apple, when they came up with that idea. Such a simple idea too, but it's so simple, I think, now that nobody else can appropriate it from them because it'll look like they're copying it. Oh, you guys are just copying Apple's. I was talking about this with somebody very recently about how, well, why doesn't Google do that with the Pixel? Why don't they do shot on Pixel billboards? And the reason is probably because the marketing team, every time somebody brings that up, like, oh my God, but it's so obvious. We're just copying Apple. Nobody
Yeah.
nobody wants their marketing campaign to be, oh, we're copying our biggest competitor. That
Right.
doesn't feel great as a marketer. But at the same time, it's a very effective campaign. And the images Apple puts up, if you're in the Bay Area, for example, they change very frequently. There's always new pictures going up, just to keep catching people's eye. And it works. And I think that's probably to an extent too, where the DSLR is dead argument comes from, is the idea, oh well, we can put an image from an iPhone on a 50-foot billboard, so what use is a DSLR anymore? Obviously, we can capture these beautiful images on a smartphone, so why do you need the dedicated camera? I think there are plenty of arguments for the dedicated camera still, but the kind of broader sentiment, yeah, that smartphones are replacing the DSLR and dedicated cameras in a lot of respects. I mean, I don't think you get any argument from anybody about that. It's been going on
No.
for like it's been going on since camera phones were a thing. I
Oh,
mean,
totally.
exactly. So it's a trend that just keeps emerging.
Well,
But
and I think it also creates those really fun pockets. The smartphone is the all-rounder, immediate convenience device. Doesn't mean that I ever want to put away my mirrorless camera, which is going to afford me a more focused, better tools for content creation when I need them. And the same thing with audio. I just did a review on a little audio player. Like, most phones are good enough. I'm listening to MP3s and podcasts, like that's fine. And then I fire up some FLAC files on a really nice pair of headphones, and you're like, man, this isn't good enough now. But that's a very focused, like a very singular use that I have to dedicate time for specifically for that. I wanted to circle back and actually kind of address a few of these, because there's like this 4-block paragraph from Facebook. And he starts off, and Mr. Gundotra starts off with this notion of comparing open and closed ecosystems as how one can better improve and evolve something like a camera than the other. And normally, I feel like that conversation is usually weighted to the open ecosystem having more competition, which creates better products faster, as opposed to the closed ecosystem where you only have that singular perspective. Especially in his point, because he's mentioning Samsung specifically, and this is a quote: "Ever wonder why a Samsung phone has a confused and bewildering array of photo options? Should I use the Samsung camera or the Android camera, Samsung Gallery or Google Photos?" That to me starts to read a little like sour grapes from someone who didn't realize his social media strategy with Google Plus more than it's, I think, a fair accounting of what Samsung looks like in the market when we're talking about photos and social media.
Well, it's not even correct, because the Android camera hasn't worked for other phones for like 3 years.
I know.
Since around the time Vic left Google. It's again, it's kind of one of those things where, yeah, well, maybe if you say it that way, it kind of sounds like, oh, it's confusing. There's nothing confusing about it. There's one camera app on a Samsung phone. You open it, the camera opens. Samsung's interface choices are completely irrespective of anything Google does with Android. I mean, Samsung's
Right.
going to do whatever they want. And the idea that Samsung is, he also goes on to talk about how, well, when manufacturers want to add these new features and say to, developers, oh, we want to service this new feature, well, manufacturers have to wait for Google to build an API. And it's also a lie. It's not true. Samsung can build their own APIs, and they do. There's tons of Samsung APIs out there. And now, maybe for smaller manufacturers, it's a bigger hurdle to get over, but it's never stopped Samsung.
Well, and wasn't that addressed? I feel like, again, I mean, to parrot your point there, that Vic seems that he's commenting on things as he understood them past tense when he was with Google, but I really feel like 2 years ago, we got the Camera 2 API, which even for smaller manufacturers addressed a lot of these concerns, moving from phone to phone and having different interfaces and having different, Android relying on that hardware in different ways. Now, I mean, like, one of the only holdouts is like Sony doesn't support RAW capture through the Camera 2 API. And I think that's it. I think everyone else has
Yeah.
kinda
The
gotten
Camera
on
2
board.
API has surfaced all of the necessary controls that you would want over a smartphone camera, all the ones that are meaningfully useful. So yeah, again, you're right. It's not really much of a point anymore. Google has done a lot to address these things over time. It has taken time, but I think they've definitely made a lot of headway, especially in the imaging area, if that's the one area is going to really point to.
Now, here's one of the things that I want to try. I want to try and sort of hash out from Vic's perspective, Mr. Gundotra's perspective. And this is one of the things that I've always had a problem with in when we try and broach these Android and iOS conversations. And people will make claims about how much superior something like the iPhone camera is. And I want to counter with something more along the lines of the main credit I will give an iPhone camera is its familiarity. And so, like, when I was shooting on DSLRs, when I was a hardcore Canon user, I mean, I'm a reasonably good photographer, but if you were to just drop me in Nikon land, I would struggle to achieve the same kind of output that I could organically get to with my familiarity of a Canon camera. And I kind of feel like whenever people are making these comparisons, a lot of them are confusing or conflating the familiarity of using one type of solution, as opposed and making that the quality argument. And do we think that maybe a part of that might just be over the last couple of years, he's now become wholly familiar with iPhone cameras? The iPhone camera hasn't significantly changed ever since the introduction of the
That's a good
iPhone
point.
camera app. And so that maybe he is just more capable of creating a good image on an iPhone, not because the camera is better, but because his familiarity with the tool is more reinforced.
I think that's maybe part of it. I think the other side of it for me is on, kind of just general philosophy toward imaging. I think among Android manufacturers is a little different than what Apple does. I think Google's done a better job of trying to, reinforce the idea that maybe imaging should produce more natural results. Even if HDR doesn't always look very natural, let's try to at least make it look like something that could look natural. Whereas on a Samsung phone, processing can be very aggressive. I think a lot of times for people who are used to maybe using a DSLR, an Apple product may feel more familiar and the product may feel more familiar. And I think that it feels cleaner. It feels like, well, if you are going to edit it, you know, and you want to do those things that happen after the fact, for people who are really into photography, maybe. For average people, I don't think anybody cares. You know, they're going to apply their filters anyway, regardless of what phone they're capturing on.
Right.
And that's whatever. Yeah, I think there's definitely an argument to be made for the familiarity thing, you know, because, you know, Samsung's camera interface is, unless you can ignore all the visual clutter, which arguably is what I've learned to do over the years. I just ignore all the buttons. Like most of them are totally useless. They don't do anything that's helpful, you know, and there's all you just need to know is where the shutter button is and that you can tap to focus. You know, those are your big tools. So I think there's probably that to an extent. Yeah, the familiarity argument is a decent one. And one that I think Google is, you know, seems cognizant of in their phones that they're building, in terms of just keeping things very simple. But if you're going to, again, if Samsung becomes the counterpoint, then, you know, it can be a different discussion. But I think that in the grand scheme, I don't know that most people care very much. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a shutter button. You press the shutter button, it captures an image. There's a viewfinder. All camera phones are pretty much the same that way. You know, they all have that level of familiarity.
I mean, like, I think the tiny vocal minority of people like me who do care about those things are finding the solutions that we need to feel like we're well serviced in the market. It's rarely like, oh, well, I really wished I had this feature, and there's just no solution for me to get that done. I found it, you know, like maybe it's a Huawei camera, maybe it's an LG camera, maybe it's a third-party camera app, but I found it. I cared enough to go out and do that homework. I completely agree that I think most people, general consumers, I think have an expectation. And this is also one of the reasons why I want to give Vic the benefit of the doubt here is I think your point on Google products is kind of right, spot on, perfect, where the Nexus and Pixel camera app has definitely evolved over time, but it's managed to maintain a really consistent experience for those times you might want to fire up something like a panorama, or you might want to actively toggle HDR as opposed to just letting the camera make the decision for you. Whereas I think if you were to go back to like a Galaxy S5 and track from the S5 to the S8, you would be in a completely different, you know, software experience, completely different territory. You know, like if you made that kind of update, S6 to S8 or S5 to S8, you're learning a completely new language just for controlling some of those basics. Like the first time I handed my S8 to my wife, she went to hit the shutter button and it zoomed because she lingered just a little bit and it flicked the shutter button. And that's now a new function. And that was like, well, I just missed this shot of my toddler because I didn't know that this was different now.
That's a fair point. And changing things like that, I think, is something that I think manufacturers should be pretty careful about, that some haven't been. I remember when Motorola changed something about zoom on their cameras, probably like, oh geez, it must have been like 3 years ago. It was very unintuitive the way they did it. And it just felt like those sorts of things can't even throw those of us who use lots of phones off, especially for a moment. Once you figure it out, but you can understand how a regular consumer might immediately get frustrated and get kind of upset if those kinds of basic, you know, consistent interactions aren't followed across different devices. That said, I think, you know, moving from Samsung to Samsung phone, yeah, things change, but I also feel like it's always been kind of, they've always just kind of had an interface that isn't very great, if that's a specific example that we're going to go with. So
right. Well, and I mean, and I think it should be. I mean, they're the top Android manufacturer. I feel like if we're going to be making the comparison, it's probably the most likely we're going to be talking Apple v Samsung. But that's also, I think, why I think so many other manufacturers have missed out on opportunities to try and tell their own story. Like, you can't do shot on Huawei. Everyone's going to go, oh, well, you just copied the iPhone. But that doesn't mean that there's not some other conversation where you can try and reach out directly and tell that story to potential consumers.
Yeah, and I think that is an important thing to do. I think that, God, I really wish Google would do it, because I think they have the product that has the most compelling story to tell. Not that I mean necessarily that the Pixel always captures the very best images, but they're trying hard with the whole, you get unlimited Google Photos backup, you know, and it just works. You know, every time you're connected to the Wi-Fi, all your photos go up into space. And, you know, if you run out of space, then your phone's like, hey, let me delete some photos. You don't need these. or your Google Photos is like, hey, you've never looked at these pictures. Do you still want them? And
Right.
it'll be like, all this kind of little stuff, where the camera becomes something more than an image capturing system. It becomes a way to manage, the memories you've created with that system. And that's part of where I took umbrage with what Vic Gundotra said about computational photography, where he brought up that, Google had Vic Gundotra loved Auto Awesome, apparently. I hate Auto Awesome. I think everything it produces is terrible.
Yes.
It is. And all the stuff it produces is like this gaudy garbage that just looks so corny. I mean, some people like it. So, aesthetics and taste each their own. But I always felt it was just stuff like I would never want to share on social media. It always just looks so overwrought, and like 80 Instagram filters have been applied to my image and turned them into a GIF animation. Like, I don't want that. It's not that's not highly shareable. That's just weird. Looks like it's gone through like the Google deep learning algorithm or something.
Right.
So he was, that's was the example he brought. Is like, oh, but Google's gotten away from computational photography. And it's like, well, I mean, if you want to look at it through that one very, very, very selective lens you've chosen, maybe Google.
You can't even say yes. You look through that selective lens and it's still maybe.
Yeah, it's like, well, no. I mean, I open Google Photos every time and the assistant's like, hey, I made a stylized photo for you. It's not like super awful like Auto Awesome used to be, but it's like, sometimes they're really bad. Sometimes they're like, okay, I don't think I've ever used one. But then it does other things like, hey, this person's in your pictures. Would you like to send them your pictures that they're in? Because maybe they want those. Like, I recognize this person. Maybe we could identify who it is. So in the future, when you take a picture with them, like you want to share that with them, like in an album. Like shared family album or the shared albums too on Google Photos are great. And I think, I mean, that's not even speaking of like, Google's HDR algorithm, which I think is like almost magic on some level. It's incredible stuff that it can accomplish when it works right. And I just think that he looks away from the product that actually matters to the photo, the photography experience, which is what happens after you take the picture. That's what happened. Right. That's what's important for most people. And that's where Google's focus is. Like, I can go into Google Photos and be like, I remember I took a picture of somebody's dog and like, I wanted to share this picture with somebody. And I can just type in dog and Google's like, I've got all your pictures of dogs for like the last 7 years. Here they are. And you can probably type in like brown dog or black dog and it would understand what that means too. It's pretty incredible what it can do. Like, if I'm looking for, a picture of like, if I went to a restaurant and I had a steak, if I type in steak, it's going to find a steak. Like, it's pretty incredible. To say that Google's moved away from a computational approach to photos, I think is just not right. They're just not doing it in that way that apparently he found very compelling.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think this is why this outburst has resonated so much, because I'm going to keep using a phrase like sour grapes, that Google didn't head down the path that he thought was going to be more impressive or what he enjoyed about photography and sharing and social media. And so it's obviously now what they're doing now is the inferior solution. I think the only Auto Awesome photo I've ever shared was one of those weird one-time Halloween images where it turned you into like a zombie. And that was funny because it actually did a pretty good job of that. And literally everything else has been a waste of my time. But then I look back on the evolution of because I was a big time Picasa user way back in the day. So I had all of my photos uploaded through this Picasa account, which was tied to my Gmail, and how seamlessly that transition happened through Google Plus into Google Photos. It's not like I've ever had to manage 10 years of photography. It was all handled in one direct evolution through these different products. And like you were saying, like if I want to search for a steak that I had back in 2008, I can find it, and I can find it reasonably quickly. I know what I'm looking for, and I have a pretty high level of trust that Google's gonna aid me in that mission. That to me has been a key part of this transition, a key part of this change. Where it matters a little less to me whether or not the HDR perfectly captures the shadow detail in clouds in a bright beach pic, but I know when I search for a sunset 2 years later that I'll probably be able to find that photo.
Yeah, and that to me is also such a huge source of, if we want to talk about closed ecosystem a little bit, like that's a great ecosystem lock-in feature to, note that, well, I don't want to take my stuff off Google Photos because then it's going to be really hard to find anything because I've never done any active organization of my photo library whatsoever.
Right.
I've just let the system do it. It just knows if I want, X or Y, and that's actually another great thing about Google Photos. Like, I'm a huge Lightroom user for all of my stuff that I capture on my professional camera for work, especially. I've got a library of like 20,000 images there that I manage, and I've got some stuff sorted, some not. And Lightroom's great for certain things and great for processing photos and just kind of general management. That said, I would never put most of my personal photography from my smartphones on Lightroom. Probably wouldn't get much out of it. I get way more out of what Google Photos tells me, especially in terms of the search functions. Because honestly, the signal to noise ratio when I'm using my smartphone camera sucks compared to when I'm using my pro camera, because when I'm using my dedicated camera, I'm thinking a lot about the shot I'm taking. I'm not taking 5 different shots of the same thing usually. Maybe like 5 different shots from different angles and everything to kind of, if I'm trying to, do something that's like aesthetically pleasing. But yeah, if I'm on my smartphone, it's possible I'll take like 12 images in like span of a minute, and most of them are probably useless garbage. And so Google Photos is, generally able to more sort through that. Whereas a system you have to actively manage like Lightroom, well, that's a bear. You have to go through and do all that and figure out what you do and don't want, So yeah, I think Google is really, honestly, this is the most important part of smart personal photography right now, is managing and just generally keeping track of what you capture, because we capture so much now. I think that's, Google Photos had, they said they were getting 1 billion images a month, something like that. Some insane number. People take a lot of pictures. And so I think it's fair to say that figuring out what people want to do with them after they're uploaded is probably a more important question than, like you said, whether or not the HDR gets your shadows right, or maybe there's a little bit of lens flare in one of your pictures at night. Oh no, that to me is a little less important.
Now, I will fight you. The Pixel camera had terrible ring flare. That lens flare was awful.
Yeah, it's still a pain whenever it comes up, and I just look at one of those photos and I'm like,
everything was so perfect. I had someone fight me on that. He was like, "No, I really like it because it's like this authentic feeling of vintage photography where our glass wasn't so pristine." And you're like, "That's fine for you, I guess, but I'm not going to make that a selling point for a phone. Is that it degrades your images in a pleasant way?"
Yeah, I don't need to be in J.J. Abrams mode on my camera.
Oh man, one of the very first. I mean, they actually have addressed this somewhat in software, but I was doing a night shot and I was just catching these street lights where the lens flares were completely horizontal from edge to edge of the video. Like, that's ridiculous. That's impressive. It's so ridiculous. I did want to circle back to one other idea on the API and get your thoughts on this too. And Jules actually just reminded me of this in the chat. Could maybe some of this discussion be influenced by the historic notion that iOS has been better for third-party services like Instagram, where the image processing, the APIs that Apple supplies developers and how they're utilized. Well, first of all, you're just supporting far fewer devices. So I think it's easier to optimize there. But there's just still been that historical notion that if you share a photo on an Android and you share a photo from an iPhone, that the image processing is probably going to be better on Instagram from the iPhone.
Has Instagram switched over to the Camera 2 API yet? I thought
that I don't know. I don't believe they have.
Okay. I wasn't aware if they had or not. I know that the poster child for this problem is Snapchat. If we're going to pick one where it's not just a problem, it's like infuriating that they won't fix this. Where the image quality is so heavily degraded because they're using viewfinder capture, which is just like, it's like barbaric. This is how we did things like 7 years ago on Android. Nobody wants to go back, man.
Right.
We can figure this out. I mean, I get there's a lot of devices out there, but maybe you could make it work for like the 10 most popular ones. But anyway, I agree that's definitely something that's always going to be a bit of an issue. But again, with things like the Camera 2 API, it's becoming less of one. Google has been pretty good about identifying those developer pain points in terms of adopting for multiple devices. In some areas, better than others. I think that, for example, rendering, gaming, for example, can be a really tough one to build a, good set of profile metrics for a device, because a lot of time it's chipset and manufacturer tuning dependent. But for something like photographs, well, yeah, we can build a camera API that gives you like the basic stuff you need for any, modern camera. It's there, it's usable. So I think that, yeah, you still have this problem, but I think it's much less of a problem than it used to be. I think, again, that's kind of a theme in Vic's post is, well, yeah, 3 years ago you had a good point, sure, and I think today there's still a point there, but I don't think it's nearly as strong,
or at least not something that would dissuade someone from buying a product
yeah.
that also fits the rest of their lifestyle.
And exactly, if you were that devoted to Instagram, you just do, what I think most people do anyway now, is you don't capture from Instagram. You just, grab a photo from the gallery after, because you're able to do that now and it doesn't show up any differently.
Well, and
So
even from an iPhone, I don't know anyone. I'm sure there are lots of people who shoot directly through the Instagram interface. I'm just saying, in my circle of friends, you've gotten so used to whatever shortcut. So
yeah,
someone mentioned in our PN Weekly from using the hashtag, it was Rena Chan. Double click on the home or power button, push virtual shutter button, photo taken. There's nothing confusing about that. Sort of addressing some of Vic's concerns there. And same thing from an iPhone. You lift the phone and swipe the screen, and you're in the camera. There is no point in trying to capture through finding an app in a folder or on a different homepage to try and capture a moment. The immediacy of the smartphone is its selling advantage over a traditional camera. I find it dubious that this is really a big motivator for who's using Snapchat over who's using Instagram.
Yeah, I agree with that. And for example, just like things like the popularity of like double tap power to launch camera. I mean, it goes to show that, yeah, most people are just interested in the immediacy and just, getting the camera to work as quickly as possible. Yeah. Capturing through apps, I think, is more kind of it's kind of a holdover, I would say, from, you know, I guess it might come from PC computing, but it feels like something that's just very archaic, comparatively. I don't think people generally are using their phones that way. But
I mean, and I think the one aspect is, like, because I don't know that we found a good consumer solution for editing. So I think that's why we've seen the popularity of services like Snapchat and Instagram Stories, where you sort of hold on the screen and it shoots little snippets of video, and those just get sort of stacked and layered. And that's how you can create a small little video piece. And when you do look at, like, even an iMovie, the people who are likely to sit down and try and edit together a cohesive video or narrative from a phone is probably a lot lower. And I just think that's probably one of the last, I think, holdouts for a custom camera interface. And it's something that is inherently replicatable. Like, Samsung could update their camera app tomorrow, and they already include, Snapchat style animated filtering stuff. Like the idea that you could just sort of tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, pause, and there's a 2-minute video. Doesn't seem to me like it would be something outside the reach of Samsung developers.
No, and I think that Samsung's concern with things like that is probably, for as much, flack they get for the kind of the shotgun approach to features, Samsung is probably trying to show a little bit of impulse control in terms of just adding things, just being like, we need this now. Apple did it. We must add it.
And I mean, like, we're talking a very little bit of company self-control when it comes to stuff on a Samsung.
Yeah. So I think it's, I think that, and I think Google is actually probably if we want to look at can we do it as the question, and Google, every time I talk to people who work on the Android team, the process of adding anything to the OS, anything that is user facing, is true endless agony. Anytime, any button, any new toggle, anything that's exposed to the user that gives them a new option or a new button anywhere, it has to go through this tremendous amount of skepticism where nobody thinks that anything should be added, basically, because you're just going to complicate things for the end user.
Right.
So I think that philosophy is what has driven Google. And I think that, it probably drives certain other manufacturers too. Samsung, obviously, to a lesser degree.
Right.
But I think that's, I think that's also something worth bringing up in terms of just kind of general OS philosophy. And it's something that, interestingly, for me, for Apple, I feel like Apple has cared less about recently, been more
Agreed.
willing to throw features at the OS and see what gets, taken up. For example, 3D touch.
Exactly.
And they're removing certain 3D touch functionality in iOS 11, right? I think there was
Well, yeah, they're kind of moving the goalposts on that, and I think in a way that again, it's Apple. Apple built this reputation for never beta testing
Mhm.
their general consumers, but 3D Touch has felt like to me like this has been a moving target. What is it that we expect from the additional functionality of this gesture? Gestures are always really tricky. I mean, like I think BlackBerry OS had a hard time entering the conversation with so much gesture dependent functionality. And I don't think Apple has a good answer for that, especially conveyance, because there is no conveyance on what is a gesture, a 3D force press, and what's just sort of a normal long press, or what can you activate through this process. It's very it's silent to the consumer. So you're going to use your iPhone the same way you've used every other iPhone, and occasionally you might accidentally peek or pop on something, but that really wasn't a core new way for you to interact with your phone.
Yeah. So I think that, yeah, some of the kind of traditional conceptions around what Apple does right and what, Samsung, Android, et cetera, do wrong, not always, holding up anymore in kind of the modern era necessarily.
Yeah, these two are kind of meeting in the middle as their own fiercest competitors. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you've got that feature, we can do that too. We got a great little tweet here from Brandon Hari using the PN Weekly hashtag. It's not about the photos, it's the memories. Nice slogan from our
That's good.
RDROB11 for the Shot on Pixel program. So he just crafted a whole brand campaign for Google using your quote there, and I just thought you'd get a kick out of that.
That's really good. I like it. Somebody should tell Google.
Well, so I mean, I guess like the last thing that we need to unpack is what phone camera do you like? Because now then we can call you the bright kind of shill for the company that you obviously prefer and are getting paid for to use
Yeah,
their
of course.
stuff. And
Oh, I just love the Pixels camera. I mean, I look at some of the pictures that I've gotten on that camera. I'm just
right,
like, yeah, okay. Every time I want to throw my Pixel, I'm just like, okay, but the camera is really good and it's really fast. And
yeah,
I just keep coming back to those two things. And for the camera, I think it comes down to, the processing to me is somebody who, uses a dedicated camera sometimes, even for, kind of leisure activities. Like, the processing is not so aggressive. The HDR is not always realistic, especially in low light, but I feel like the end product I get is usually more usable. And especially if you want to frame things, the thing about using a single lens smartphone camera is like, well, you've got one vantage point.
right.
And so if you want to crop and work with your images a little bit, some cameras, I won't name names, LG, don't really give you much room
No,
in terms of, taking photos apart and cutting them down a little bit beyond making them square. So I like that about the Pixel. I've always been able to, craft my photos with the Pixel a little bit more. And I just think that the fast capture experience is unbeatable. Nobody is even close. I think that in terms of, by the time you double tap the power button and you hit the capture button, it is easily the fastest smartphone imaging experience out there. And that is also huge to me.
yeah, it was really startling in 1 year to go from double tapping the home button on the S7 and be like, wow, this is pretty snappy, to at the end of the year picking up a Pixel and going, wow, this is really snappy.
Yeah, it's
Getting
scary.
to that
It is.
image. Yeah,
You can go straight from double tapping to burst capture, and it doesn't even skip a beat.
right.
There's like witchcraft going on there. So yeah, I love the Pixels camera. I love that I get the original quality uploads on Google Photos. I think that's for me, as somebody where the original quality probably doesn't really matter, but the photo person in me is like, I'd like that, please. So it's an upsell for me, definitely.
Yeah, like I'm not going to be the guy who archives everything. And this has like been one of the weird transitionary phases. Like I still use OneDrive as a backup because we pay for Office. We have to have Microsoft Office. We might as well use OneDrive as sort of a secondary cloud. And the number of times I've had to go back in to try and get something out of OneDrive have been just incredibly painful
Yeah.
after having used Google Photos. And so while I'm not going to save every photo, the photos that I do save, I want to have some kind of archive, like archival quality, not just I can kind of share it and it still looks pretty good. Like I might want to recrop it or pull someone's face out of it or, make it black and white and put it in a picture frame. And I can actually print phone camera photos now and they look really good. To have that access to, like, the Pixel made a really compelling argument for that sort of general consumer philosophy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially with the edits, everything happens in the cloud. So everything's reversible. The original's always there no matter what,
Right.
and it's generally very smart about sharing stuff. Like when you share images from, Google Photos, it strips out location data because it knows you probably don't want that in there. But it preserves it in the original in case, like you want to search for your photos by where they were taken. It's just kind of, I think that they've done such a good job with that, and it makes the imaging experience so much more seamless. I think that if Google could tell kind of a product story about camera, it would have to center around photos more than the camera itself. And yeah, I think that's just such a big part of why I like the Pixel in particular. I think it's the best camera for using Google Photos, and Google Photos is the best image management. Image management makes it sound so cold and clinical. The best personal like media creation or media
No.
management.
Go back to your slogan. That's going to be part of the ad campaign. It's memories. It's
Yes,
the best
managing
way
your
to manage your
memories.
camera.
Yes. Yeah.
See, a
So
Pixel. And now
yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
exactly. So that's definitely a big part of the reason I really like it. So yeah.
Right on. I mean, I think people who have watched this know that I'm kind of a Huawei and LG fanboy for photos and for video, but I have a lot of love for the I guess I want to call it like the Pixel process or the Pixel ecosystem or whatever we want to say. I can't get over some of those lens flares, but
Yeah.
just that whole system that they've created. I mean, and again, why I'm really anxious to see what we get for the Pixel 2. Because I don't think it takes much. We're talking some very minor adjustments for that to go from being a very highly recommended camera to probably one of the best consumer experiences on the market.
I think
And
so too. Yeah, there are some changes they need to make, for sure. Optical video stabilization would be a good one. I feel like their creepy Terminator EIS is like, yeah, impressive, but like, maybe if we could do a little bit of a hybrid approach, so it doesn't look quite like somebody's like, panning on like a machine.
right.
It has that kind of creepy feel to it, and the video quality at night on the Pixel is very dodgy. That's
Yeah.
something I also feel like they really missed the mark on. I think that may come down to choice of sensor and processing techniques, but yeah.
Well, I think it's just a notion of fighting physics at that point. You've got such a small sensor and you
Yeah.
have to use the full frame length. So you're shooting 30 frames per second. Each frame is going to be about a 30th of a second. That introduces a lot of blur in low light, and you can't really crop stitch and reformulate blurred video. So you see that sort of ghosting blur effect.
Oh, it's less the ghosting, even like the noise. The noise that phone can produce at low light is pretty. It's pretty ugly, even in middling
impressive.
light. Yeah, it's. I definitely think that's one of the shortcomings, and yeah, hopefully they do that. And I'm guessing based on kind of the two leaked renders we've seen now, both one we published and the one that OnLeaks published. I'm guessing that the lens is designed that way for a very specific reason. So, maybe giving themselves some more leeway there for optics in terms of how the sun and various light sources are going to play with the camera lens.
No, I've been a big fan of a lot of these dual camera experiments, but I love the notion of Google really trying to nail down and focus on refining what was already a very good experience. I didn't have the same sense from Samsung this year, where I felt like the S8 was sort of a lateral move from the S7, just had more fun features. To see Google, like, again, like they're not going to make the move to more sensors or a larger sensor or some other, gimmick until they've got the core perfect. And that's exactly what I want to see from a manufacturer. That was even why I was a little disappointed in the iPhone dual shooter. Because again, they released hardware that didn't have all of the software for it at launch. And then what we've gotten is fun. It's good, but I don't think it really addressed like core photography. You use the zoom sensor and your image degrades. Like it's not as nice of an image as the main sensor. And those kinds of things like that feel so uncharacteristic of Apple to have that kind of a disparity on one product. It wasn't like a generational change. It's like on one product, your photos look different moving from sensor to sensor.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I've heard about, and yeah, I think that's maybe part of the hesitancy of some manufacturers to go to camera. Obviously, we're going to see Samsung do that with the Note 8. I'm curious to see what they manage with that. Samsung having significant buying power and also their own image sensor production capabilities, so they are definitely the one to watch for that. I feel like what we've seen Motorola now do, and which was copying what Huawei did with the monochrome sensor acting as basically a sharpening check and contrast check against a color sensor. I think that's interesting. I don't think that you need a dual camera story around that. Like the idea that like, oh, well, we've got one camera that's black and white. It's different. So like, no, you don't need like, that doesn't, I don't get anything out of that second camera. Like I get that it's there. And yeah, maybe if you're super into black and white photography, like, yeah, okay, cool. But I think that the approach is definitely having either a very wide angle and then a more standard camera, or having a standard camera and something that shoots more portrait at a longer zoom. So
Right.
I think that I think what we've seen is that Samsung's going to go with the long zoom on their secondary camera.
I think it's pretty likely that, again, they're facing Apple. That's probably the biggest competitor in their sights, and reaching parity means having similar features, but doing it one better. So instead of a 2x zoom, it's going to be a 3x zoom. Whoa.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what Apple does to refine the two-camera experience this year, or if they really do anything to refine it. That's going to be a big question, and I think that if we do see really impressive results from Samsung and Apple around the secondary camera systems, especially in terms of improvement in image quality and maybe of optics, that could leave kind of an open question for Google. Why didn't you push harder to do this? But, we'll see. A lot of big what ifs still.
Yeah, and this is sort of the last little exciting period of downtime we'll get before we're just swamped with reviews and comparisons and stuff. So it's been fun speculation. David, I really want to thank you for jumping in on this. Jules reached out to you. I could have kissed him on the face, because you were exactly the kind of person that I wanted to have this conversation with about Vic's comments, and specifically, and then just sort of the current state of Android photography in general. So again, thank you for jumping on this podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I had a great time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we can put a pin in this show. Again, we kept you a little longer too, David. So I'm just going to go through our little wrap-up spiel here and put a bow on it. Ladies and gentlemen, folks, another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. This show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where David is... Oh no, I lost my note. RD.
Oh God. My Twitter handle is a dumpster fire. It is RDR0B1. Just look up Twitter David Ruddick. Just go on Twitter, search for David Ruddick. I'm the only result. It's okay. Yeah, my Twitter handle is bad. I should feel bad about it.
Sorry, and I had it written in my other show notes, and then I didn't move that over. Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home site, pocketnow.com, and now Pocketnow in Spanish, es.pocketnow.com. Shows like this cannot exist without your support, sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and dropping reviews wherever you can review podcasts. Because ultimately, there wouldn't be a show without our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of technology goodness, so make sure you tune back in.